Hello, welcome to Talking Politics. I am Hassan Zafar, and we have a special guest with us today, Richard Gage. Let me introduce you, Gage. Richard Gage is from San Francisco Bay Area. He's an architect of AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation along with his courageous wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center WTC high rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. The organization he founded, AE 911 Truth, now numbers more than 3,600 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the explosive destruction of all three World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. As an architect, he has worked on most types of building construction, including numerous fireproofed steel-framed buildings. Most recently, he worked on the construction documents for a $400 million mixed-use urban project with 1.5 million square feet of retail, parking structure, and mid-rise office space, altogether about with 1,200 tons of steel framing. So that's you, Richard Gage. Thank you very much once again. The fundamental question that arises in my mind about 9/11, we know about the World Trade Center Twin Towers, but Building 7, that was a football ground away from the Twin Towers, that came down the very afternoon. And I have seen your previous videos in which you have shown the comparison between the what you call claimed demolition sites, which are acknowledged demolition sites, and the videos of this Building 7 that came down in the same fashion. Yep. How did that happen? What was the intention to bring that structure down, knocking that building down? Please.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. All right. And let's dig into it. If you want to share the slides, I'll sure. Go ahead and get going. Wake up call for me and those of us in the 9/11 Truth Movement, because I didn't know after 5 years, I didn't know that a third tower came down. When I realized that, I'm going, wait, why didn't they talk about this? Why didn't we get I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. We didn't get one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history. It's been swept under the rug. And so I started this organization because I go, my God, these are buildings. Turns out all of them were explosively demolished. You're going to see that today very clearly. And so we get into it with some intrepidation, because the fact that our media across the world, all the way into Pakistan, didn't show us the truth about what really happened to these three towers on 9/11, we've got a huge wake-up call here. And so we start with Building 7, easily the tallest building in most of the states in the U.S. here. Wasn't hit by a plane, and yet it came down anyway. This building was about 110 yards football field in length away from the North Tower, and it came down, and it was fine. It stood fine. It got hit by some beams. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, said that this damage was not a significant part of the building's collapse. Well, let's look at that collapse, shall we? Here's Building 7. we have an isolated event in the east penthouse in the upper left, and then 6 seconds later, this entire building drops like this, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint. Go ahead.
Professionally done, isn't it?
Well, but professionally done. But let's listen to what they say. This is Shyam Sunder of the project leader for the NIST report.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, so he says fires brought those buildings down. Let's look at those fires. These are the fires that we have photographic and video evidence of in the building. As you can see, they're few, they're small, and they're scattered throughout the building. And these fires are burned out on the floor of the initiation of collapse that NIST hypothesized over, almost an hour before the building came down. That's what the videos and the photos show. But NIST claims these fires were raging, and they need those fires raging at the time of the collapse, because their collapse theory is an expansion, a thermal expansion of long span beams in this floor 2012. And so we know that the fires were out on that floor. That's what the videos show. So we have lots of questions for NIST, and we've been asking them for 18 years now. The 3,600 architects and engineers that I have represented, we have much hotter, larger, and longer lasting fires in these buildings, Doctor. We've got to get at reality here. None of these buildings have come down due to high-rise fires. These are steel frame, fire resistant, structural steel buildings that are type 1 construction. They're designed as an incinerator. They don't collapse, not even fully engulfed towers like you see here. Not one of them has collapsed before or since 9/11. But on 9/11, we have 3 of them that collapsed. So we got to ask ourselves, what does it really look like? Let's put a known controlled demolition on the left, a series of known controlled demolitions, and building 7 on the right. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since fire, the official cause of this building collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame, fire protected structure ever? So we got to ask ourselves, does it have any of the features of controlled demolition? And sure enough, it seems to. Beginning with feature number 1, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, let's listen to Dan Rather.
High shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, he's using his intuition, his common sense, really. What brought this building down? I mean, we have a frame of reference here in the United States. It's the old hotels in Las Vegas, and we just love to watch them coming down. It's kind of amazing. But do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Well, let's look from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do you do that? We've got to take out the core columns all at once, within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. Any deviation in that pattern, we have a real problem. The building will fall over or something like that. And this is not a symmetrical building. So it is even more subject to asymmetrical collapses. But are these fires capable of that precision to take out all those columns? Look what happens if you don't take out all the columns. You get something like this, or this. Somebody stops and somebody has to go back into that building and fix those charges. So the question is do these fires have that capability of precision? Were those fires burning at this time? If they were burning at this time, then they would be focused on the northeast corner, and the building would expect to fall in that direction. But it doesn't. It goes straight down. We might have expected it to do something like this. Buildings that are damaged asymmetrically fall asymmetrically. That's just common sense. How fast is it falling? Feature number 4. Pretty darn fast. In fact, at free fall. Now, that's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. Well, the bowling ball has no resistance under it. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel resistance, 3 to 5 times stronger than it ever needed to be to hold this building up. In fact, you can see in this building the incredible members. Well, what does that mean? Not one of these steel columns gave any resistance for that period of free fall, which is a third of its 7-second fall, as acknowledged here by NIST in their final report, which came out 7 years later. They finally acknowledge that after denying it for that long, they acknowledged that it came down. Oh yeah, at free fall, because members of AE 9/11 Truth had publicly embarrassed them into acknowledging it. Well, what does that mean? That means that not one of these 80 columns.
That's the question. Where did the columns go?
Where did the columns go?
Yes, and there's another question in my mind. How long does it take to install demolition material into the main columns? Like if you intend to bring a building down professionally, how long does it take?
Must take about a month at least, with professionals having access to many of the core columns and beams in the building, because these fires didn't have such access. Those core columns and beams are fireproofed. So these are important questions you're asking, and these are the questions we've been asking NIST, but not getting answers. It would require something that could take out the total dismemberment of these moment-resisting steel frame building, where the columns and beams are very rigidly welded to each other, and X-braced frames. They gave up all at once. Falls like a house of cards. And buildings,
because this is where the investigation should have expanded.
Yes.
If something like a month or more than that had taken to install that kind of material into the main columns of the building, so the investigators should have looked into it.
They sure should have, and they didn't. They had one goal, and that was to write this building off as destruction by fire. But look, buildings that fall due to natural collapses, in this case earthquakes, they fall over to the path of least resistance. The columns and beams are not severed one from another, like we saw in Building 7. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. Can these few small scattered fires accomplish that level of destruction? No. So we ask ourselves, what could have? Are there witnesses that hear sounds of explosions and see flashes of light? Well, here's Daryl, a medical student, interviewed that evening.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
A sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, windows busting out, and then the building coming down. What about Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic?
You heard explosions, like boom. It has like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me,
Were these, Richard, were these eyewitnesses interviewed by the investigators also, or is this your own diagnosis?
NIST claims to have interviewed more than 116 first responders. They apparently missed all of these. So they seem to have been consciously avoiding the witnesses that actually heard explosions, and you're going to hear a lot of them. But for Building 7, we have these few. Here's Bill Rosati, who saw something important.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere.
You saw a big flash and then the building coming down. Well, here's Barry Jennings. He is the deputy, the emergency management. He worked there on behalf of the housing authority. They were called to a meeting. He and Michael Hess, Mayor Giuliani's attorney, were called to the 23rd floor where the emergency management office was, and they were late. They didn't realize the entire building had been evacuated. So this is their experience trying to get out of the building. Now, the building had been evacuated after both planes hit the towers. That's why they evacuated it. They didn't know the towers are coming down yet. They didn't come down till well after this experience of Barry Jennings.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
Also the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs? Bombs like this heard in the late afternoon of 9/11?
It's abundantly clear what they are saying, that there were explosives inside the building, and it does not feature anywhere in the official report, Commission's report on 9/11.
No.
These particular interviews, these first responders, never been taken into account in the official story.
That's correct.
Right.
Including this one.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
That is a bomb heard in the late morning of 9/11 in the vicinity of World Trade Center 7. So we got to ask ourselves, what is going on here? We talked to some experts, like structural engineers, like 36 of them among the 3,600 architects and engineers. A localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. So that's important, and that caught the attention of many other structural engineers, including one of the most highly sought after forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Halsey from the University of Alaska, who, along with this team of PhD students, is taking began a 4-year study of what really brought this building down and what couldn't have brought it down. They found that, gosh, if NIST is right and columns 79, 80, and 81 failed, the building would have tipped over. That's just common sense, right? So
Yeah.
they go, well, what would it have taken to bring it down the way it came down in reality? Where you see the video of the building's collapse in the center. On the left is Professor Halsey's his computer model. On the right is a computer model of NIST, the U.S. government's computer model. And even though they fail 400 structural steel connections every second, the building begins to tip over. It begins to crumple in like a beer can. They can't even reverse engineer it sufficiently to get it to even look like the collapse of the building on the video. So they stop it after 2 seconds. They don't want us to see it tipping over. So that's pretty darn interesting. What were the findings of the Halsey work? A fire did not cause the collapse of this building. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. The thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. And the collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST.
That's really interesting that all the columns failed simultaneously, and the heat, as it is stated, couldn't have really melted those columns, those steel columns, if the heat was not so high.
That's right, Dr. Savar. And yet, Zafar, we have evidence of extreme heat, which was denied by officials that we're going to look at right now. So, they say it's just fires. Well, fires don't burn hot enough to melt steel like this. FEMA, in their original report in 2002, did a detailed study, metallurgical study of the steel. What did they find? Now, NIST threw out all of these findings, mind you. But here's what they said. Never before observed intergranular melting capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese. Now, fire can't do this. As you've begun to point out there, fire is only 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, about half that Celsius.
Do we have any lab test of the debris of this building, if there was any explosive material?
Well, this is
that material should have been in the debris and along with those columns where that material was placed.
This is a piece of steel from the World Trade Center 7, one of total 256 pieces of steel that were saved.
Okay.
And this one was metallurgically analyzed, and so was a piece from World Trade Center Twin Towers. And they found the same thing: rapid oxidation, sulfidation, liquid iron. That's molten iron. That's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1,500 Celsius. So sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. That's pretty darn important. And yet NIST threw out this entire analysis. It's perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, according to the New York Times. But it's omitted.
I don't see any mystery in all of it, because it's a clear evidence the building was knocked down on purpose. Does it not establish thus far?
I don't know what you mean, locked down on purpose.
Yeah, it was demolished.
Oh, brought down on purpose.
It was
Yes.
brought down. Yes.
Yeah, this is absolutely clear. And yet NIST completely omits this, suggesting that the sulfur must have come from gypsum board. Well, wait a minute. Gypsum board is used for 100 years to protect steel from fires. It's never turned around and attacked the steel that is designed to protect. So NIST has some real problems here, including the exclamation by the fire protection engineer Jonathan Barnett, who says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. Wait a minute. It takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel. What are we talking about? Fires typically don't get a quarter of these temperatures and never even a half. So what can melt steel, pouring the molten steel or iron pouring out of the material held in the crab claw excavators? We can tell by its color what its temperature is likely to be. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees here. That's 1371 Celsius. So fires don't get anywhere near these temperatures. The worst fires that we use are 1,000 degrees Celsius. But office fires and jet fuel is said by this manufacturer to burn only 315 degrees Celsius. So where are these temperatures coming from? Could they be coming from thermite? What is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Maybe we're getting somewhere, Dr. Zafar, because if thermite were used, it would explain the incredible temperatures, 2,000 degrees Celsius here. It would explain the presence of molten iron. We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. This is iron, elemental iron, which is the byproduct of thermite. It would also explain the presence of sulfur, which is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. So we're going to go looking for it. Is there any evidence of ignited incendiaries, i.e. thermite, in the World Trade Center dust? Well, the U.S. Geological Study did hundreds of studies of the dust, and they found in 2006 in their particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust, billions of what? Previously molten, meaning 1,500 degrees Celsius, iron, meaning molten iron, the byproduct of thermite, microspheres. How do they get spherical? We'll find out in a second. But they're so ubiquitous, they're used as a signature component to distinguish World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. This is everywhere. They don't know where it came from. They're up to 6% of some of these samples are previously molten iron microspheres. But we're talking about 4 tons of material. So RJ Lee Group does independent studies. They find the same thing. They go, we don't know where these came from, but they're formed during the event, not before, by the iron workers welding the building together, not afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart, but during the event. Well, how do you get previously molten iron microspheres? Let's burn some thermite. Maybe we can find out with an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Okay, they look like sparks, but they cool and fall back into the pan. They are molten, previously molten iron microspheres. Why are they spherical? That's just what aerosolized liquids do. They form themselves into microspheres because of the surface tension. That's what raindrops are, for instance. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, that was all evidence of ignited thermite, some of which was in the World Trade Center dust, some of which was in pools of molten iron described by the first responders. Let's see if there's any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust. And yeah, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen finds and studies these independently collected samples, and they find in all of them these curious red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. Unlike paint, though, they are attracted by a magnet. So the largest of them is like 1/16 of an inch. These things were blown to small pieces. They get real curious as they go, wow, what is this stuff? They zoom into the red layer of these red-gray chips, and they find evidence of aluminum and iron. Fe is iron, elemental iron. So we have the ingredients of thermite in these red-gray chips. Oh, they get real curious now. They zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find nano-sized particles of iron oxide and aluminum powder. Nano-sized. So we're talking about materials that are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. What are they doing there?
Establish?
What?
What does that establish?
That establishes that there's nanothermite, which is a very specific form of thermite, which is developed by Lawrence Livermore Lab in 2001, because it has these same properties, these same behaviors. Explosive composites based on thermite reactions, whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed on the nanometer size scale. See, when you get these particles so small, their surface volume increases exponentially, and they become much more reactive. They've engineered an incendiary, which works by means of heat, massive heat, to become more explosive, which works by means of gas, knocking things over. So that's what the original peer-reviewed chips have produced in the peer-reviewed literature, and that's exactly what these chips that they found in the World Trade Center dust produced also. Not only that, what do you imagine that the chips produced when they were ignited? They produced molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and produced and analyzed in all the World Trade Center dust by the USGS and R.J. Lee. So you see, we know exactly where those spheres came from, as if we didn't know. They're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. So this is a very high-tech process. This is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. In fact, it's been peer-reviewed in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. They've concluded that the red layer is active, unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. So we know how those towers, all three of them, were taken down. Go ahead.
Very, very sophisticated material. So
Yeah.
it requires a lot of expertise to produce, right?
What?
It requires a lot of expertise to produce this kind of material.
Yeah, it really does. And it was never reviewed, examined, discovered, analyzed by NIST. Not once. They just dismissed it out of hand. Oh, that's conspiracy theory. Okay. Well, we have all 10 key characteristics of controlled demolition for Building 7 and for the Twin Towers with regard to the extreme heat and the nanothermite and the evidence of thermate. So fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all 10 of them, with additional circumstantial evidence, corroborative testimony. That becomes proof. Proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation. Many of them appear in our new 9/11 crime scene to courtroom series, which you can watch on 9/11 911c2c.org. And in that, you'll see a dozen of the experts laying out their testimony, along with Mick Harrison, litigation director for Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and myself in a boardroom to our stand-in grand jury. We produced 3 of these dozen episodes so far. So we encourage you to see and co-produce the film series along with us because we've filmed everything. We're in editing now, post-edit. So we want everybody to think about that and join with us because we're going to jump into the World Trade Center Twin Towers now. And we find that there's a lot of reason to be suspect about the Twin Towers. After all, if Building 7 was brought down in a controlled demolition, and we just saw evidence that it was, then we got to ask ourselves, is it possible that the Twin Towers could also have suffered a similar fate? Look at them. Let's find out. I mean, just take a look simultaneously coming down here, though they were 15 minutes apart in reality. Upward, outward, arching streamers is what we're seeing. A geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, laterally ejected 600 feet away at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists. Trailing what? Thick white smoke clouds. Wait a minute. Structural steel is not flammable in office fire conditions. Why are all of these steel sections from these exterior perimeter building components trailing thick white smoke clouds? Well, remember, we're talking about thermite here, which we've already seen evidence for. If thermite were used on the ends of the beams,
when I saw this video first,
we would have the thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash trailing them. What were you saying, Doctor?
When I saw these images first, these videos on live television, I thought it was the smoke that was caught inside the building, and when the building exploded, because of the pressure of the smoke inside, the smoke came out. That's what my understanding of this smoke was.
Well, there's a difference between smoke coming out and thick white smoke trails trailing these structural steel sections. They're not flammable in office fire conditions. So this is not smoke being forced out of the building. This is the result of something burning on those structural steel sections. And we're going to take a much closer look at that as we look and at the features of controlled demolition relative to the Twin Towers, like we did for Building 7, such as feature number 1. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, looking at the North Tower, it's at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. There's no hesitation, no jolt, no impact upon crashing into the hard, cold steel below the point of plane impacts. So we already have some problems just breaking this down. Same at the South Tower. It's standing at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. So we got to ask ourselves, what was the official narrative? Well, the official narrative tells us that the upper part drives the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroys itself. What are we seeing instead? Look at the lower red line. That upper part is not driving anything below it down to the ground. It is being destroyed itself in the first 3-4 seconds here. We can very clearly see that. It's telescoping in on itself. If it were there, we'd see it. We would see it driving the rest of the building down to the ground, but none of the photos, none of the videos show such a thing. If it were there, we would see it driving these few remaining core columns that stand 800 feet in the air for 6 seconds before they themselves are hit with an explosive down below, which shakes the concrete powder off and gypsum board powder off of its structural elements, and then descends frame by frame through that concrete and gypsum powder. So we got to ask ourselves, what are we looking at here? One of these is a volcanic eruption. The other is building the North Tower. So what have we, is there a similarity? Is there a striking similarity? Upward, outward arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks again, freely flying, molten, solid objects trailed by thick white smoke clouds. What'd you say?
No, I'm just listening to you, trying to understand the similarity between the two pictures.
It's incredible. Yes, the volcanic eruption is on the right. It is amazing. And so this really helps to open our eyes as to what we're looking at here. So does the evidence of explosions heard by how many? 156 first responders talking about sounds of explosions recorded orally a month after 9/11 by the New York City's commissioner. And this is an amazing set of testimony because it was withheld from us, first of all, for 5 years by the New York City until they were forced to turn it over to New York Times. Now 12,000 pages of testimony are produced, and all of them read by the late Professor Graham McQueen, who found among these 156, we felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. You can hear the specific order of events again and again. They're hearing something, they're seeing something, they're feeling something, they're being blown around by something, and then the tower comes down. All of a sudden, the ground just starts shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up, and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw flash, flash, flash. The lower level of the building, like when they demolish a building. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. Saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all four sides. Materials shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief, expert witness, need to be? There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor and another. When it hit about the fifth floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. There are more than 245 more quotes like this. I don't have time to read them all to you, but you can read them all. They are on the New York Times website. Do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse? That's number 2. Well, actually, the South Tower begins to fall over. So we have asymmetrical damage from the loading on the building below. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires. We have asymmetrical damage from the damage by the planes. How in the world do we get complete symmetrical damage all the way around each face of the building, just like the firefighters described, like a belt going all the way around all these explosions? Well,
the question that comes to mind, people who designed all of it, they did not realize that it will be examined or re-examined one day, and people like yourself will find out what actually happened, or were they not worried, or it was poorly orchestrated.
Yeah, people should have seen this well before I did. It took me 5 years to come on the scene. People should have seen that in this close-up video, that there are independent explosions in this looped video, easily seen as individual explosions that could only have been done by pre-placed explosives in the exterior of the building, producing what looked like a dozen independent explosions, including the one below that's obviously mistimed. This is not a gravitational collapse. This is not a directed energy weapon softening steel so that it could blow out in these explosive ejections. This is not a nuclear weapon going off. It's been hypothesized by others. These are many, many individual explosives, floor by floor almost. So we have
So
to.
here's a question.
Yeah.
A building of this size and the structure of this strength must have taken plenty of time to install all that demolition devices.
Oh, months.
Months. Where was the security of the building? Where was the CIA, if you like to say, the secret services, the agencies, when all that material was being transported to this site, when it was being installed? It couldn't have happened overnight. Must have taken weeks, if not months.
Agreed.
So where were all those security people when all this was happening, and where were the people? And the people who were residing in the building, who were working there, they never noticed anything of that sort.
Well, the buildings were only half occupied, first of all. Second of all, they were moved around in order to facilitate elevator and fireproofing modifications that I'll show you about. And the security company, we certainly want an investigation of them because they have some very curious individuals on their board. But I'm showing you evidence, and I'm trying to avoid speculating. And so this is where our credibility lies, is in the facts that we're presenting. Although the questions you're asking are very important. We'll try to get to some of them here in a moment, though. nevertheless, because they're irresistible. Feature number 4, do we have isolated explosive ejections? Well, as a matter of fact, 20 stories down below that, 40 stories down below that zone of destruction, and as far down as 60 stories down, we have these squibs or isolated explosive ejections. There's no accounting for these in the official narrative whatsoever. And yet they are full of solids, building components. It's not air pressure being blown down. And here on the left side of the South Tower, as it begins to tip to the right, we have a dozen independent explosive ejections going off all at once, effectively removing the rigidity of this upper structure so that it doesn't act like a rigid object and roll off the solid object below and land onto the ground in like one piece. It behaves like sand almost, a pile of rocks, and falls straight down.
Yes.
So we have to ask ourselves, how fast is this building coming down? Well, it's been reviewed by physics teacher David Chandler yet again, and it comes down at 64% of freefall, meaning that 90% of the structure has been removed. There's a calculation that gives you that structure, that result. Well, wait a minute. If it's coming down at nearly free fall acceleration, through what? Through 80,000 tons of structural steel beneath the point of plane impacts, without even slowing it down, it's getting faster and faster and faster every second, gaining velocity every second. That's the definition of acceleration. Well, there were 240 massive perimeter columns, 14-inch square steel tube columns. There were 47 incredible steel columns. There were 52 inches at the base by 22 inches. It's coming down as if it's almost not even there. So what about those structural steel sections? They're landing all around the building in a 1,200 to 1,400 foot diameter, impaling themselves in skyscrapers, destroying the winter gardens 600 feet away. So that is 2 football fields, and destroying the Deutsche Bank building across the street. These are those units, and they you can see the man in the upper right. They're huge. They're 4 and 6 ton units, and they are trailing thick white smoke clouds individually. You can see them individually ejected at up to 80 miles an hour, like this one, about to hit building 7 in this case. Wait a minute. Back 2, forward 2, back 2. It's horizontal now. So it has been fired by some intense force. How does gravity work? Down. What's going on here? Out. Yes, an intense force, and then gravity begins to take over, and we got a 45-degree only at 300 feet away, a football field in length away from the North Tower. There's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball.
Is it safe to assume, Richard Gage, is it safe to assume that all these details were deliberately kept out of the official narrative and from the Commission's report?
Yeah, we brought it to their attention on numerous occasions in the last 18 years of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. We have brought all of this evidence in many different forms, videos, our petition.
What is their usual response to your findings?
They don't talk to us. They ignore the evidence of lateral ejection. They completely ignore it. They
They just
have
don't
said
respond to your emails, or they just
they don't
don't
respond to our emails. We did do a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request. You know what they said? Because we said, where's the you've produced for Building 7 a detailed analysis of it, but don't we get the architects and engineers the input data for your computer? They said, well, no, we can't give that to you. It might jeopardize public safety if we were to give you the input data. What do you mean? That's the only out they have in this country.
I am particularly intrigued about Building 7, and I have a couple of questions about it after
Well,
you
wait a
finish.
second. Let me finish that
Yeah.
point, because how does it
Then-
jeopardize public safety? We're the architects and engineers who are just tasked with ensuring the public safety. Shouldn't we have this, since there's many other similarly designed buildings that could fall at free fall as a result of a few small scattered fires? Shouldn't we have that? Yeah, that was the answer to that question. What did you have another question there?
I want you to finish your presentation, then I can ask you those questions.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question.
Okay.
If 100,000 tons of structural steel framing is distributed well outside of the footprint, how in the world can it contribute to the crushing of the building below? It can't. This is a third of the weight of this building, and yet it is not available to crush the building below. It's been distributed up to 600 feet outside the footprint, all over ground zero, as you can see. And as you can see here, well outside the footprint of these buildings, it can't crush it. Maybe it's a concrete, because we're looking for 110 floors, each an acre in size. Concrete poured on metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for 110 of them. We don't find 50 of them. We don't find 10 of them. We don't find 1 acre size floor. We don't find a half acre, a quarter acre, a 16th of an acre size floor. They have been evaporated. Go ahead.
Evaporated. So that makes it quite mysterious, doesn't it?
Well, we have to ask ourselves what happened to all that concrete, and we can get a clue, because we know in real pancaking collapses, we have a set of pancakes, a set of floors we're looking at. Even in the Myanmar earthquake in Bangkok, we had this 33-story high rise. We see pancakes at the bottom, right? We're looking for those, but they're completely missing. Where did the concrete go? Oh, there it is. It's pulverized in midair, pulverized to a fine powder. What in the world can pulverize 90,000 tons of concrete in each of these buildings to a fine powder? Well, all we have to do is look at the American Society of Testing Materials test C856 to determine that concrete can be powderized at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, about 600 degrees Celsius, 900 degrees Celsius. So we have an answer here. We've got thermite that produces up to 2,000 degrees Celsius. So at 900, if it can be powderized concrete, what can it do at 2,000 degrees Celsius? It can be powderized back to its original form. Aggregate, cement, and sand and gravel. Go ahead.
Must have turned into very, very fine powder, right?
That's what we're looking at.
Yes.
And that is the answer. And if that is the answer, then we got to ask ourselves, because this concrete was spread over lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area from river to river is concrete. 30% of this dust is concrete. Well, wait a minute. If concrete were spread over 3 square miles, what's crushing the building? Wasn't the steel, and it sure as heck is not the concrete. So together, this is 2/3 the weight of the building that's not even available to crush the building below. That's just the physics of it. So we have 8 key characteristic features and 2 more with high heat features of controlled demolition. Fire doesn't create any one of these, let alone all 10 of them. With additional circumstantial evidence, corroborative testimony that's available in our 4-hour presentation, we find that to be proof to 3,600 architects and engineers, again, many of whom appear in our documentary 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, and our other documentaries, 9/11 Explosive Evidence. Actor Ed Asner narrating a professionally developed film for PBS WTC 7, 15 minutes just on Building 7. And the movie about the University of Alaska's Professor Leroy Hulsey in their effort to get to the truth about what happened to Building 7. All of this information is available on our website. You can download it for free and print it and send it to people. This is evidence of controlled demolition for all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers. Knowing that, we know that we have a real problem with 9/11 that is much darker than we ever anticipated. At least me, for the first 5 years, I'd never heard any alternative theory as to how this came down. It's like the America has been brainwashed. And I don't know about Pakistan, but I assume that there was a similar propaganda that was pulled over the eyes. So we got to ask ourselves, where do we draw our line in the sand?
Yes, you're right. Because when I shared this information with the people around me, with my friends, their immediate response was, "What are you getting into? Haven't you seen the documentary on Netflix?" That's the truth. Captain Dan Hanley, who is responsible for bringing us together. And then I talked to Barbara Honegger, Carl Schwartz, and now yourself. If we put all these pieces together, those who are watching this video now, if you start from Captain Dan Hanley's story, then move on to Barbara's, and then to Carl's. One thing is becoming clear, that the Boeing 777 or any other aircraft of that kind couldn't have penetrated the strong columns of these buildings. Impossible. They have soft noses. They can't penetrate through those strong columns, steel columns.
That's certainly not my opinion. I appreciate that it's yours. I have a whole presentation on how there were buildings, planes that penetrated these buildings. And we're not talking about slicing through steel. We're talking about breaking 4 bolts at the top and 4 bolts at the bottom of each of these 3 vertical columns and 3 horizontal panels that are the exterior perimeter structural steel sections. So they simply had enough mass to punch in those systems. And I can show you that if you want to.
Yes, please, if you like to show. So your theory is that, yes, those planes could have penetrated the buildings.
Yeah.
We have another theory here that these were not Boeings at all. they were swapped mid-air, and there was another kind of aircraft with a stronger frame that actually penetrated the buildings.
Okay. Well, I'll show you what I'm aware of, and then you can show me what you're aware of. So, hold on one second. We'll find our. There you are.
You can jump to the slide that you want to show.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. And we'll just jump down to, oh, it's right there. What you're seeing is largely a orthogonal. Look at the right wing, for instance. We have the fuselage and the main body where the gas is in the thick end of these wings. It has punched in. It didn't slice. It punched in and broke off the steel section. See, 3 horizontal, whoops, and 3 vertical. And they didn't slice steel at all. And you even have the tail section up here doing damage not to the steel, but to the cladding. The aluminum cladding over the steel has been damaged. Same with the wingtip. The aluminum cladding is damaged, but not the steel behind it. The steel starts to be damaged in the thicker part of the wing. So that's what I wanted people to immediately be aware of. There is also damage that.
Yes, that's what I know from Carl's interview, that the plane did penetrate into those columns, into the building, but it was not a Boeing that was originally thought of, or which appears in the official narrative. That plane was swapped mid-air by another aircraft, A3, that was specially designed to penetrate into these buildings.
Okay, well, that raises another question of which plane actually hit the building and penetrated it. There was, I agree that there was the switching out of these planes with remotely guided aircraft, because as Captain Dan Hanley has pointed out, they're in all likelihood these hijackers, who many of whom failed Cessna flying school, could not operate these planes, and the planes maybe couldn't even be operated, the civilian aircraft, without having been switched out and with hardened and more exact capability like a military aircraft.
Yeah. So the curious question about the Building 7 now. What was so special about Building 7 that it had to be destroyed?
Well, we don't know the answer to that question. We can speculate that it did have the worst damage was in the 12th and 13th floor, where the Securities and Exchange Commission was actively working on some of the most highly prestigious cases against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom, which were huge cases, which were destroyed by this impact, the destruction of this building. So that's one speculation, which makes all kinds of sense. The fires were very suspicious, being the worst fires in the building. And so many believe that they were arson. and then you have the IRS, the CIA, the Department of Defense, Secret Service was in this building. Who knows what the motivation might have been to take out those offices as well. Also, some speculate that the 23rd floor, the Emergency Operations Center, that Barry Jennings and Michael Hess had reached and then were told to get out of there. There's bombs in the building. And indeed, they found bombs in the building, blowing them up or impacting their escape from the building. As well as Richie Rotans, the emergency operation deputy director, who was in the building looking up and saw floors missing from the building up above him, columns dangling. And they were really concerned about the building at that point. Well, obviously a bomb, huge bomb had gone off in that part of the building, and a elevator that cab that had been blown out of its shaft and landed down the hall 30 to 40 feet. That is clearly a huge explosion as well, a separate explosion. So yeah, we got to get to the bottom of this, but we can only speculate why Building 7 was taken out. Also, Larry Silverstein owned it, and he got massive insurance put on not only that building, but the Twin Towers, of course, and the rest of the World Trade Center. 7 walked away with $5.68 billion after investing only $115 million of his own money.
Thank you very much, Richard Gage, for sharing all this with us. What I can say from your investigation and your presentation, that what we are listening to is not a conspiracy theory at all. These are hard truths. If anybody can come up with a better evidence or a counter argument, we would like to see that in times to come. But for now, what we have heard from Richard Gage is a very convincing thing. And this is not the end of it. There is more to come in this series, maybe another 10, 15 interviews will contribute to the making of this picture in its entirety. So let's wait. So let's wait until then. Thank you very much, Richard, for your time and for your presentation once again.
Thank you, Dr. Zavar. That's really special to get this information out to the people of Pakistan. Appreciate it.
And to the rest of the world. And thank you very much for watching.